Hi, I'm Pat and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to try to help Samcrac fix his BMW i8. If you're new to the channel, please click the subscribe button and ring that bell for notifications. And also, hit the thumbs up because this will help get this video noticed. I enjoy producing cool car content, and I have a BMW i8 here that I've owned for nearly 2 years. I am being asked to help Samcrac out with his BMW i8. That's right, a lot of my followers reached out to me and said, Pat, Sam bought a BMW i8, he's having issues. You can help him. Well, I tried reaching out to Sam, but I had trouble getting through to his FaceTime, but I kept trying and for some reason was able to mysteriously get in while he was finishing with his stepmom. So Sam gave me all the information about the i8. And this included all the information from the Carfax, as well as what he thinks he knew about the car so far. Now, when he told me about the Carfax and how many times this car has traded hands, I said, I remember that car. In fact, I was looking for exotics before I bought the Acura NSX, and one of the dealers actually had that same exact car, that i8. It traded hands so many times, and when I looked at the Carfax even more closely, I saw it had been repossessed, there had been a water pump that had been changed out of the car, multiple times it had been taken back to the dealer, and eventually Sam was told that the only possible way for us to fix this problem is to replace the mid-engine. I told Sam this doesn't make much sense at all. If the car actually runs, why would you have to replace the mid-engine?
All right, Pat, the engine is running. Does this sound normal? No smoke coming out of the exhaust, which is a good sign. A little tappy, I gotta tell you. I don't know if that's normal for a 3-cylinder or not.
And I went back down to my garage and I started my car up, and it really didn't sound that much different.
So this is a cold start, so it's gonna be kind of throaty for a little bit and then it'll get a little bit quieter. Okay, so it just idled down. I'm just going to take the camera under here a little bit, see if you can hear this.
So to me, it sounded like his engine was running perfectly fine. Although when he drove it, he was starting to get indications on the console right away that the car was overheating. So this is one of the more common problems that BMW i8 owners face. If there's some type of a leak in the coolant system or there's a component replaced, it's going to overheat if they don't go through the process of vacuum bleeding the system correctly. In fact, a lot of people reached out to me and said, I took my car in for warranty service, they replaced the part, they put new coolant in the car, and now it's overheating. It wasn't overheating before. What should I do? It turns out that it takes a lot of attempts for a dealer to actually get the car completely vacuum bled. In order to bleed the system, Sam's doing everything right. He has a vacuum bleeder up here, connected up. You pull all the air out of the system, and then you flip a valve and it pulls all the coolant back into the system. But you have to drain the system completely or the vacuum doesn't work that well. So each time somebody got a hold of me and said, Pat, my BMW i8 was overheating, and I took it back in and they tried bleeding it and it's overheating again, what ends up happening is that dealers have to try over and over and over again, running through the same process of trying to bleed the system. So I was kind of curious what Sam actually experienced when he got the car to see exactly what the problem could have been. So I have the Carfax right here that Sam had sent me, and there are a few things here that stood out to me right away. One of the most interesting things was the air conditioning compressor was replaced in the car, and that was in June. Now that's an expensive repair. There's a link in the description. I talk about that particular issue with the BMW i8 a lot. But the second most common problem that is plaguing the i8 is, of course, the coolant. Now I do see an entry here where the water pump was replaced, and we don't know for sure exactly how they replaced the water pump, or which water pump it was. In fact, the BMW i8 has a lot of water pumps in it because the high temperature coolant circuit that I talk about in my other video about coolant problems has a lot of different parts to it. Not only do you have a radiator and a mid-engine, but it also flows through many other parts. It flows through the turbo. It has a mechanical coolant pump. It has a electrical coolant pump. It has valves, and it has auxiliary heaters. There are many, many things that are on this high temperature coolant circuit part of the car that could potentially be more problematic than just a coolant pump that they replaced, and could also prevent this car from actually bleeding correctly. Now, there's also a second low temperature coolant circuit, but we don't want to mess with that. That's working just fine, and that manages the temperature of other components of the car. So it's completely isolated from the high temperature coolant circuit because it gets really complicated in this car. So large reservoir that's up front here that Sam has been working with in his videos, that manages the high temperature side. One of the last lines in the entry here in the Carfax was at a BMW dealership where they did some type of a maintenance inspection. And Sam reached out to that dealership and they told him the recommendation to the customer was to replace the engine. So that was alarming to me. It didn't make any sense. Why would you have these particular issues in this Carfax related to a coolant issue and you have to replace the engine? Now, the coolant temperature sensor is at the top of the water jacket, which is at the top of the block in that engine. So when you're trying to bleed the system and you're trying to replace all the air in the system with water, if you can only get water so far up and there's air at the top of the water jacket, well, that's where your coolant temperature sensor is. So no matter what he does at this point, unless he gets all the air out of the system, it's always going to overheat, and that temperature sensor is going to be the first thing that gives him an indication that he's overheating because there's no coolant there. Now, one follower reached out to me and said that he was having a coolant leak. He found it in his garage and he has a lift. He decided to remove the underbody panels from the bottom of the car. He found it. It was a loose clamp. He replaced the clamp, and then he went through the process that's in the service manual, drain the coolant out of the system, hook up a vacuum bleeder, and refill it. He then did an old school method of grabbing a hold of the hoses and massaging them, trying to burp the system to ensure that he got as much air out of the top of that water jacket as he possibly could. Then he went through the process of starting the car, bring the revs up, let them come back down, seeing that he actually was getting some heat to come out of the system, in order to make sure that he completed the rest of the process. Now, he never had an overheat condition. It worked the first time he tried it. So my recommendation to Sam is to do the same thing. Get the rest of those body panels off the bottom of the car, because I know I removed the center and the front body panel, but not the rear underbody panel. So get that off of the car. Go through the process of completely draining the system, vacuum fill it, and then go ahead and massage all the hoses. But at the same time, verify that those hoses have not been tampered with. See, this car was also repossessed. And that means that during the repossession process, well, the owner may have actually sabotaged the car. They may have done something to make sure that the coolant system was screwed up badly to the point where nobody could fix it. They could have clamped the line shut. They could have rerouted something. They could have disconnected something and plugged it into something else. Wouldn't it be something if they actually were able to take the electric coolant pump lines and swap them so it actually tried to push the other way? It'd be defeating the purpose of the mechanical coolant pump, trying to pump water. This would be trying to pump it in the other direction. Could be something like that. So I urge Sam, take the underbody panel off the back of the car and examine it closely. I have a video out where I replaced the automatic transmission fluid in the car and had to remove that rear underbody panel. Now, many of my followers have reached out and they've said, I have an issue with my car. It appears to be leaking coolant. And should I just add coolant to the reservoir at the front of the car? And I tell them, don't do that. You open the top of that reservoir, it introduces air into the system, and if there happened to be a leak somewhere in the system, that air is going to rise to the top of the water jacket and your engine will overheat. So just don't mess with that. That radiator cap is very important to just leave closed and leave sealed, and the only time you open it is to really go through the process of actually bleeding the system. So applying the vacuum and then refilling the system with coolant. So I would not recommend anybody touch that. But the other thing that I saw Sam had an issue with was that radiator cap itself fell apart in two pieces. Now it does have a spring in there and it does allow some coolant to pass through one of the bypass lines back into the system. So if that wasn't working correctly, it's very possible that that may have contributed to some of the issues that he was having. But the other issue that Sam has right now is he has to replace the radiator. He also ordered a new water pump for the car. The other thing that I believe Sam should check out is to look for obstructions in the lines. And he could probably just squeeze the hoses and try to find obstructions, but a better way of doing this is to take the hoses that come off of that main section, those two aluminum lines that run from front to back, and hook up a garden hose to one of them. If the water flows through the engine and comes back out the other side, he has no obstructions. So Sam, if you're watching, those are the things I would take care of. Obviously, you're going to replace the radiator, you're going to replace the cap on top of the reservoir, and you're probably going to go ahead and replace the water pump, unless you actually just try to run some water through the system. Put it through one hose, see if it comes out the other hose, and if it doesn't, well, you might have another obstruction in there that you want to check into while you're already in the back of the car working on replacing that water pump. So what do you think? Leave some comments or questions in the comment box below and let me know your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications, and please give me a big thumbs up if you like this video. Thanks for watching and happy motoring.